Hi everybody, James from after the video was recorded here. I'm here with a special announcement. As you may remember, we are going to be doing a charity live stream to benefit the Trevor Project for Pride Month this year. The special announcement is that we've actually set a date for that live stream now. So mark your calendars for Saturday, June 17th. The exact times are still up in the air, but it's likely to be about noon to midnight Eastern Standard Time. Or Eastern Daylight Time, I guess now. Eastern Time. Greenwich Mean Time -5. So you
the
should...
time America was founded on.
Exactly.
Eastern Standard.
Eastern...
Everything else is a mistake.
Eastern Time. Anyway, so tune in on June 17th. We'll update the time in a community post or another video down the road, so make sure you sub to the channel so that you get all of our notifications about the live stream event. We're really excited to try to raise money for a cause we all believe in, and we hope to have a lot of you there supporting us as we do. Thank you,
yes.
And go enjoy the rest of the video now. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Paleontologists Rank the Dinosaur Designs of Jurassic World Evolution 2. This week, we're going to talk about, I think, the most phylogenetically basal theropod, for sure, that we've featured on the series, given that Herrerasaurus may not be a theropod. We're talking about Monolophosaurus today. This is also an animal that is not featured in the movies at all. This design comes from Camp Cretaceous, if I'm correct about that, right?
Yes.
So we're talking about our first Camp Cretaceous... Wow. So we're talking about our first Camp Cretaceous design today. Before we get into Monolophosaurus, we're going to briefly introduce ourselves for any new viewers. I'm Dr. James Napoli. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences and North Carolina State University.
My name is Amelia Zietlow. I'm a PhD candidate at the American Museum of Natural History.
I'm Alex Rubenstahl. I'm a PhD candidate at this here Yale University.
And I'm Reverend Dalton Meyer, a PhD candidate also at Yale University. And James, I got jealous of your doctor title, and I remembered that I'm ordained online.
Damn, look at it.
But you know what? We are together.
Together.
We're the skeleton
crew.
Praise
oh
be.
my god.
Praise
yay.
be.
Praise be.
Praise be.
Reverend Meyer.
Speaking of...
Oh, sorry.
No, I would like to speak to the Reverend. If you really are a Reverend, then how come you did not respond accordingly when I told you my son was risen? Only one person responded with the appropriate callback, because I sent that message to a lot of people.
What the are you talking about?
We don't talk about risen so much in the Universal Life Church.
Oh, you're a reverend for a fake religion?
Right.
I can perform real marriages.
A boat captain can do that.
Well, I'm not a boat captain, am I?
Anyway,
we gotta go around on the sea.
Reverend Meyer, would you please show us Monolophosaurus?
Certainly. Look out. Here they come.
There they are.
They're not as bad as I remembered.
Well, there are two skins, and one of them is like much better than the other.
Yeah, I mean, they're a little... The design's a little wonky, but before we say anything about the design, we are going to tell you the etymology of the dinosaur's name, because we realized that was a good thing to do in the episodes, and we almost always forget. Monolophosaurus means one crested lizard. It's mono is one, lopho is from the root for crest, and saurus is Greek for lizard. It's pretty clearly a callback to Dilophosaurus, which you will also see in this game. It's very famous from Jurassic Park. Dilophosaurus is two crested lizard. This is one crested lizard because the crest is right down the midline of the skull.
What's the species name?
Wucai.
Wucai.
No, I'm sorry, that's Guanlong.
This is jiangi?
Yeah, Monolophosaurus jiangi. Or jangai.
Here's the crest.
And do we know what that is for or from?
I think it's a person. I'm going to look it up to
It's
make sure.
it's from like an ancient, either it's a ruin that's near where they found it, if I'm not mistaken, or in that
much
kind
cooler.
of area.
Oh, yes. Jiang Miao. An abandoned desert inn near where the fossil was found.
Tight.
And Jiang Miao means the temple of the general, because local legend has it that a general was buried there. So that's kind of neat.
That's a cool name.
Yeah, it's a good name.
So, do we want to talk about phylogeny, where this thing goes? Do we want to talk about why it's important? Do we want to talk about how Camp Cretaceous is a bad show?
Did you watch
It
it?
is.
Alex watched even one more season than I did.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I was committed. I didn't finish. I couldn't bring myself to finish it.
Yeah, I
I watched
never
the
even
first
tried.
2 seasons.
I watched the whole thing. It was fine.
Powerful person.
Monolophosaurus is a theropod dinosaur. So it's in our meat eating. It's one of our meat eaters, and it's from China. But it's an interesting and exciting Chinese theropod. First, it's from the Middle Jurassic, which is poorly represented in most places. So it's about 165, 163 million years ago. So the end of the Middle Jurassic, and it is of uncertain phylogenetic position. Mostly certain. So for a very long time, Monolophosaurus was a very early diverging member of a large group of dinosaurs called Tetnurans. This is basically all meat-eating dinosaurs except for coelophysids, maybe herrerasaurs, things like Dilophosaurus, and ceratosaurs, everything else. And for a long time, and I shouldn't imply that this is not also still currently, at least widely believed, they were basically one of the earliest diverging members of this group, that are characterized in part by a kind of stiff tail. It's kind of one of these iconic features. Then they also have 3-fingered hands, all sorts of good stuff. Recently, there have been phylogenetic analyses, which changed a few parts of the tree. In part, they pulled megalosaurs and the group that includes Allosaurus, these Allosauroids together. And when that happens, Monolophosaurus ends up as a quote-unquote carnosaur, or part of this larger group. So it's a little more derived. I am not very familiar with the anatomy of Monolophosaurus on a personal level and would not feel confident making a strong claim in either regard on where this thing goes. It's got a really complex, also it's got this big crest on the front, Monolophosaurus, that's incredibly pneumatized. There are all sorts of weird pockets and excavations in it. And they actually reconstructed correct in the game in that it's covered by flesh and skin.
Right.
And not keratin.
Yeah, everybody wants these to be cassowary casks or like bison horns. We do it to Oviraptorosaurs, we do it to Dilophosaurus, we do it to Monolophosaurus. They're not. Keratin doesn't form over. They're just essentially excavations of the skull. Like more, it's like the air sacs are just like excavating and pushing the bone up.
Sinuses.
Right, it's a sinus. Sorry.
Air sacs are a different thing.
I'm sorry, Alex.
When we're talking about this brute, they're part of the paranasal sinus system.
I know. Right. So I'm sorry. The sinuses. I know this is probably not what's happening developmentally, but I've always kind of looked at it as that. Almost like they're smushing the middle of the skull up as they try to find more space to grow. It's not really what's happening.
But I like kind of how you describe that in your head.
Right.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is there is sinus tissue over this. This is probably something that I would imagine is probably like rising and falling as the animal breathes. Presumably, right? It's not going to be covered by a keratin cask. Cassowary casks are not pneumatic in the same way. I think they have internal sinus space, but they are not.
I think so. Yeah.
They're not externally pneumatized like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like the sinuses within your own skull. Anyway, Monolophosaurus.
Oh, they're fighting.
The girls are fighting. Well,
the girls are back in town.
Is this a teenage rebellion, you may ask? It is.
Oh,
it is
geez, I don't think Monolophosaurus is that small.
No, it's big.
It's a big animal.
It's the first thing you see, or it's one of the first things you see in the Milwaukee Public Museum when you turn to go up the stairs into the exhibits proper. There's a cast of one, and it's big.
How big?
Yeah, when I say small, I mean like 5-6 meter long, not like
Yeah,
Well,
fine. Small
yeah.
for a dinosaur, but bigger than I expect.
Yeah, I mean the estimated body mass is 1,000 pounds. Like this is a fairly large animal, probably one of the
Yes.
larger animals in its ecosystem, right? In terms of
Oh, yeah.
predators, yeah. Um.
That is
So
pretty. I like it.
yeah, I mean some of these designs are actually quite pretty.
Yeah.
But before they're all killed, I wanted to briefly bring up a point, which is
Yes.
we also have Proceratosaurus in this enclosure. You'll notice there's a very similar cranial crest shape, right? Where there's another midline rectangular crest. Proceratosaurus is very similar to an animal that's not in the game called Guanlong. Now, we're going to do a separate video about Proceratosaurus, but Guanlong and Proceratosaurus are both members of a broader group that also includes Eutyrannus. They're called Proceratosaurs, Proceratosauridae. These are currently considered, and I mean there's good evidence in favor of this, they're considered to be the earliest diverging group of what we recognize as tyrannosauroids. So they're not particularly closely related to T-Rex in that they diverged from that radiation apparently in the Middle Jurassic or before the Middle Jurassic. But they're closer, I mean probably in the early Jurassic, but they're the closest known relative of the group that includes T-Rex and its more similar cousins like Gorgosaurus and Albertosaurus and Daspletosaurus and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason we bring this up is that there's this similarity in the cranial crest shape, which appears to be convergent. But some prior authors have speculated that Guanlong in particular, which is known from a very similar rock unit to Monolophosaurus. They're both from China. They're both from the
Shishiguo Formation.
both from the Shishiguo Formation. Thank you, Alex. I was distracted by the sound of the goat. But they're both
One is older.
right. They're both from the Shishiguo Formation. One is older. Monolophosaurus is a little bit older. But anyway, it has been suggested that Guanlong is a juvenile of Monolophosaurus. It is not. The reason I bring it up is that, so I know Thomas Carr had an abstract about this, I want to say in like 04 or 05, like a long time ago, and I know that he doesn't support that idea anymore. But more recently, Greg Paul in the Princeton Field Guides to Dinosaurs has reclassified them as the same thing with Monolophosaurus as the adult, and it doesn't shake out. It might not even be the case in the most recent edition, but in the edition I had from 2010, he lists them as the same thing. And this is not only like just not supported, this is like ludicrous. They're not even in the same group. And
Yes.
at the time that Thomas Carr wrote his abstract about it, we didn't really understand Monolophosaurus that well. There was a very, very comprehensive redescription of it in 09 or 010, I think. Led
We
by
also didn't really
Steve
have
Bersati.
an understanding of what Proceratosaurs were.
Well, right. So, I mean, he was writing before a lot of these groups were understood, and it's clear now that that cranial crest is convergent.
Yes.
But I bring it up because it's something that the viewer may have been exposed to if they've been looking at these things, and they may wonder if there's any support for that idea. It does not appear to be the case. Unless our understanding of what a Proceratosaur is changes a lot. Which
And I think we
doesn't seem
mentioned
likely
it
to.
in the Eutyrannus video, but while it's not as obvious in Eutyrannus also has a series of complex pneumatic spaces carved into the front of its skull. But the rest of the skull is just kind of up around it, so it doesn't look like a discrete crest.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Poor Amelia had to draw all of that.
She did such a good job.
Yeah.
I'm proud of
I
you.
was so confused.
And you should buy it on Redbubble. Link below.
Yes,
Yeah.
you should. So I apologize for the confusion. Monolophosaurus was not redescribed in one paper in 2010. It was redescribed in two. One focused on the skull and one focused on the postcrania. And that's really where our current understanding of the animal comes from. That work was led in large part by Steve Bersati and Roger Benson and Phil Curry, who are all good anatomists who know what they're doing.
Yes, absolutely.
So, that's really where we developed our current understanding of what Monolophosaurus is.
And this is something that's held up in subsequent, even very disparate theropod phylogenies that are large enough to include both Monolophosaurus and Coelurosaurs, like Tyrannosaurs. We just literally never get them together.
Right. And so, like, listen, could results change? Theoretically, every phylogeny is a hypothesis. But
except for ours, the ones we produce, which are correct.
Right. We find the divine truth. I like that social animation.
I do too. But is it the same as Herrerasaurus?
I wouldn't be surprised if these are the same rig.
If it isn't the same, it's very similar. I do think they move similar to the Herrerasaurus, so I think it is the same rig.
Yeah, it might be. What are their hands doing? Are they facing each other, or are they bunnied in?
They're not. They're bunnied in.
Yeah, that's like Herrerasaurus. I think it must be exactly the same rig.
It's possible, but also I think they probably also did the wrong palms because it was in a piece of media. I don't remember what it looks like in Camp Cretaceous, but I bet it does that.
If you really like Camp Cretaceous, let us know. Tell us what the wrists look like. I'm not rewatching it. I say, because I'm a feather freak, I like a feather. A fine feathered fellow. I say that basically every theropod had some degree of filamentous integument, and it's likely Monolophosaurus had a decent amount based on its size, and that it is a Tetnurin. It's a theropod. In terms of where we know feathers are distributed, we do know probably that they're in megalosaurs. Cirrhomimus, if it is a juvenile megalosaur, is densely feathered, so it's possible. And there's some evidence that was published, not based on fossil evidence, but on reconstruction of metabolism that implies coelophysis would have also been a little furry. So I'm confident, as well as the evidence of feathers in ornithischians and pterosaurs, confident saying that this would have been at least a little fuzzy. No, not long, shaggy down, not like a Eutyrannus, but I could picture some kind of fuzz on this guy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to agree, but we do know that the evolution of integument in theropods is pretty complex. And there's a lot of missing data, is what I'm getting at. We know that, what's the group? Oh my god. Ceratosaurs.
Yes.
We know that ceratosaurs, in particular abelosaurs, are probably entirely scaly. Well, we have a lot of scale impressions. And I think developmentally, I've never seen a case where we can actually prove that scales recolonize an area after it goes naked. Like, I know it's a question of gene regulation, and the Evo Devo papers are showing that, but I think a lot of people were kind of missing the point. There was a recent paper that came out a couple days ago that just showed if you upregulate, I think it was Sonic Hedgehog.
Yeah.
Or I can't remember if it was upregulate or downregulate. I think it was upregulate. Sonic Hedgehog is a gene that's involved in a lot of development. I swear I know more than that, but I'm not telling you more for reasons. But it's implicated in like body plan development, especially the development of limbs, and it seems to be now implicated in the development of feathers. And they found that by changing the regulation of it in like a chicken foot, you could make all of the scales on the foot develop into feathers. What a lot of people in the paleo community said is basically like, this shows that that it's very likely that feathers and scales coexisted on some dinosaurs because there's this, this leaky pipeline where you can develop one or the other. I think that's not really what the paper is testing. What the paper is showing is that feathers evolve from, you can derive a feather from a scale very easily. It does not take a lot of evolutionary novelty. It requires changes in the amount of some proteins that are expressed during development.
And the reason that the paper is not testing whether a grown animal can switch from scales to feathers is because they're specifically running these experiments in embryos.
Right.
And embryos are developing embryos are subject to different they respond to these hormones and to these regulators differently than like an adult animal would. So like, for example, there's genes that if you upregulate, their products, you can get like these weird bifurcated like hands and fingers and things in chickens. But if you were to give a living chicken those genes, like it wouldn't magically grow more fingers.
Right. If you rub a bunch of Sonic Hedgehog on my chest, I'm not going to grow a third arm out of it.
Right.
But you will grow feathers.
Right.
I mean, I point out that we know that some dinosaurs had both scales and feathers.
Yes, and I'm not trying to say that that's not the case. But I'm saying that when you get birds that lose feathering in locations, they don't regenerate scales there. they have naked, non-scaly skin.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And so I think that the question we have to ask is for, like, does the presence of obviously scaly integument in ceratosaurs mean that they had not developed full feathering yet at that point evolutionarily, or that it's a secondary loss? I don't know. There's a part of me that leans toward feathering having not really been complete at that point, that maybe filaments were expressed between the scales, but that they hadn't lost scalation. It's a difficult question. We need more fossils to tell for sure.
It's hard to say. And yet, and even the developmental mechanisms, I think that I'm inclined to agree that, like, especially the higher up in the tree you go, the less likely it is that, like, once something is feathered, it could become scaly again. But, like, deep down in the tree, with that, like, gulf of time, anything's possible.
Right. No, I mean, it's entirely possible. It doesn't seem to map with what we do know winds up happening. But I don't know. Who's to say? I'm not a developmental biologist. I just play one on the skeleton crew.
Position of argue, right? Like, we don't really know what a lot of these scales are.
It's a fair point.
Like, we know what the shape. We have casts of them, but it's not like there are exceptions. But it's just like, what is the nature of a dinosaur scale? Like what is the internal structure like? What is it? I think we joked about this before, but right, like some of the scuti and weird little scale things on the legs of birds are like feather derivatives, right?
They are, right.
Yeah. So, like, what if all dinosaur scales are
feather derivatives, right?
Feather derivatives.
We have structural information though from hadrosaurs and sauropods. Like, we don't have it in theropods as much, but like.
I should clarify that. Yeah, there's some information. Like, there are cross sections of ornithischian scales.
I think so.
And sauropod scales.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, because there's that cool paper about, like, all the pores and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess what I'm saying is, while I lean toward feathers having a deep origin, because I don't think that they evolved 3 separate times, I think they were present in the ancestor of pterosaurs and ornithischians and saurischians. Right, they're present in the ancestral ornithodira at the very least. I don't know. I think that the early evolution of the structures might be more complicated than just saying feathery or non-feathery. As we're all saying, like, this is not an argument between the skeleton crew members. That could never happen.
We're all in perfect agreement.
Yes,
always.
as always. Right.
I think another point, what I would like to just make clear, especially as I consider, like, feathery versus not feathery, is, like, not did they have any at all, or like even I could even be convinced that, like, Carnotaurus had little bristles, like, in between its scales. But, like, if you looked at it from a decent distance away, you'd be like, is this thing feathery or not? And kind of the same way that you look at an elephant, you're like, is it hairy or not?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's a good distinction. Whereas, like, gun to my head, I'd say no, it's not hairy. But then I'd be like, but technically,
it does.
It does have.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a fair.
Not to clout chase off of a big piece of media that's around right now, but Prehistoric Planet T-Rex is something similar to this, where, like, if you look closely, it has small, kind of vestigial reduced filament coverings.
Mm-hmm.
I would still not call it a feathery dinosaur, as depicted.
Right. All right. Well, that was an interesting, not a stunlock, a discussion we all had together. Whoa. We're going back in time to the Shishiguo Formation. Wow.
We're running at the speed of a Monolophosaurus.
The Monolophosaurus has entered the Speed Force. It's kidnapped someone's children.
That was everyone's Oscar favorite moment, right? Is when Monolophosaurus entered the Speed Force.
Anyway,
Oh my
Yeah, so
god,
the
I forgot
Shishiguo
that
is-
happened. I'm sorry. Oh my god. Okay, sorry, I've recovered.
That's fine. The Shishiguo is a location at which my master's advisor, an individual I've certainly talked about a few times on our channel, James Clark, has worked and made some important discoveries. And it's a little bit why I'm so familiar with it, is that I have been downstream of those discoveries and worked on some of the Shishiguo fossils myself. It is a very cool fossil locality because it is from the Middle Jurassic and it's picking up some really important events in Mesozoic evolution. So there's all sorts of good critters. There are pterosaurs. There's this really nice pterosaur, Cerasipterus, which is one of these It's a Rhamphorhynchian, but it's in 3D, so you get like a good idea of what a lot of the anatomy looks like in the neck in particular. There are mammalomorphs, I don't remember exactly, but little fuzzy guys. And all sorts of dinosaurs. So Mamenchisaurs, there are some important things like Lamellosaurus, which is not particularly well understood, but people are working on it. The very earliest ceratopsians, things like Guanlong, where they're bipedal and they have stupid like trapezoid-shaped heads, but they're on their way to becoming ceratopsians. All sorts of good stuff. And like we talked about earlier, they have Guanlong, which is this proto-tyrannosaur, very ancient member of the Tyrannosauroids. These are all very cool. But there are two fossils from here that are very cool. The first is an animal that I didn't work on, that James Napoli. Doctors hate this animal for this fun secret. That is Limusaurus nextricabilis. It is a weird dinosaur. So Joey Stiegler, Dr. Joey Stiegler, he was a PhD student while I was there. He's doing a lot of work on this, and he's got lots to say about it. But in short, what's published and what can be said about Limusaurus is, it's a ceratosaur. It's a small ceratosaur. It's one of these noasaurians, so leggy, short arms, and it does a few weird things. First of all, for a while, it was thought that it was demonstrating the frame shift in its hand from the theropod 1, 2, 3 to the bird 2, 3, 4 in the digit identities. That doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, we should I should note, we should make a video about that topic because that is very inside baseball, but I think it's an interesting story to tell. But it turns out that just noasaurians and ceratosaurs have weird hands is probably what's happening. Right. But more interestingly, the babies, because there are like a half dozen or more skeletons that are all found together, and the babies have teeth and short little faces, and the adults have beaks and no teeth. The alveoli are closed, at least exteriorly. You can actually see in some of the growth stages that transition. And it is essentially one of the only times in tetrapods that this kind of shift happens. It's genuinely bizarre. It's one of the most extreme examples of ontogeny. And here at the Skeleton Crew, we laugh. We have a good laugh a lot of the time on hypotheses of ontogenetic relationships and whether taxa are being lumped because we're all horrible splitters. Limusaurus, I believe. Limusaurus is wacky. Well, there's like 2 Meyering assemblages that show, like, they both show it. It's insane.
Oh yeah, there are tons of them.
It's like 2 separate family groups. In these,
right. These bizarre sinkholes that are thought to be made by sauropod trackways.
Yeah.
Because they're these really regular pits of softer sediment that Limusaurus is getting stuck in, that Guanlong is following them into, trying to eat and dying. And they, for a while, I don't remember the name of the taphonomist or the sedimentologist who was working on this, but he's like, yeah, there's literally nothing else that would make these shapes besides like sauropod feet. So it's a fascinating area. Like Limusaurus, great, cool, bizarre, one of the weirdest dinosaurs.
Just to interject, Alex.
Yeah.
To interject in a joking manner, the Shishiguo death pits, like where they find like the pits with all of the fossils in them, the horrible terrain tools that, like, the horrible disaster that happens when you put water down in this game accidentally created all these huge like trenches around here, and I was like, I'm just gonna leave some of these in because that's the Shishiguo death pit.
Cool. But yeah, a great dinosaur, a dinosaur that Jim shares the story, and I'm citing him because it's his story, but he names it Limusaurus nextricabilis, which is the mud lizard that's hard to get out, which reflects, I think, the conditions of their dig. And a reviewer apparently said to him, like, this is a fascinating and bizarre dinosaur. Why did you name it this? And it's also the name of a fictional amphibian in the really cool not Jurassic Park, the Skull Island field guide from like 2005. Anyway, so those are some dinosaurs, but the coolest thing from the Shishiguo Formation is Junggarsuchus sloani. Ooh, what's that? Well, it's my icon for the Skeleton Crew. You might have glanced at our kind of our symbol, the symbol our channel has, and thought, wow, it's weird that there are 2 theropods. Psych. One of those is a crocodile, and a very important transitional crocodile. So Junggarsuchus was the focus of my master's thesis. It was years of hard work that involved a complete data crash at one point and starting the project from the ground up, and countless revisions to the manuscript, because the first version I handed in was when I was like an undergrad and it was garbage. And the incredible patience of Jim Clark. But we had CT data, and I segmented out the skull along with another Jurassic, an earlier Jurassic Cenozoican, one of these early crocodiles called Bothrasuchus, but that's from a different place. It's from Yunnan. But Junggarsuchus is the skull's really only about that long. It's this little crocodilomorph, so very early in the evolution of Crocs. And it looks kind of like a greyhound crossed with a crocodile. The legs and arms are long and under the body. It's definitely not semi-aquatic. This is something that's terrestrial, running around, eating small vertebrates on land. And it's important in the kind of the story of crocodilomorph evolution and crocodilian evolution, because we see kind of the acquisition of an important feature that's happening in Junggarsuchus. So living crocodiles, they bite real good. They go snap, and then they roll, or they just bite you once and like your bones and skeleton explode, because I think they have the strongest bite of any living animal, right? Or is it a great shark, or is it them?
No, they're stronger than a great white. I think a sperm whale actually has a stronger bite force, but that's not really a fair comparison. One of them is a whale.
Right. Alligator.
Right. Relative to body
yeah.
size, it's beyond anything alligator.
Yes.
Right.
And then the fun fact that the muscles that then open the jaws are much weaker, and you can hold a gator's mouth shut. Whatever.
Right.
So the acquisitions of the super strong bite, there are a bunch of things that happen. The quadrate, the articulation with the jaw joint moves back and makes room for these huge jaw closing muscles. And the skull becomes this big rigid block of immovable bone. In early archosaurs, there's some hinges and joints in the skull that allow a degree of motion. But if you're biting with so much force that you're shattering spines, it seems like a bad idea for things to rock around. So Crocs have this extensive secondary palate. It's unclear what that is related to, which I'm hoping to figure out. But they fuse the bones, these quadrate bones, that are what articulate with their lower jaw. They get fused to the brain case, and that actually closes their ears posteriorly. So they're just exposed laterally. And in Junggarsuchus, we get the very beginnings of this. We like this very incipient contact that closes the ears posteriorly, and is the beginning of the solidification of the cranium. And we named the clade that includes Junggarsuchus and all other crocodiles solid cranium. But yeah, so there's a ton of other stuff to talk about with this taxa, but that's kind of the big takeaway. It is, I'll let you in on a little secret, that Junggarsuchus is from the Middle Jurassic, well, from the either very late Middle Jurassic or very early late Jurassic. Is frustrating because crocodilomorphs transition to what we call crocodiliforms, things that include living crocs and that have these fused skulls at some point in the late Triassic. So we have a bit of a ghost lineage. Junggarsuchus would be a very late surviving member of this transitional grade, which has other members in the Jurassic as well, like Omatosuchus, Stelagnathus, and Halopus. So yeah, we're hoping to find some Triassic Junggarsuchus-like friends.
Alex, for the record, I need to say something. I don't hate Limusaurus. In fact, I had a chapter of a section of my PhD dissertation was dedicated to Limusaurus. Because, for those in the know, and this is what I can say about my unpublished data right now, my PhD dissertation focused on what kinds of ontogenetic changes we can reconstruct for fossil animals based on modern bones. And because of Alex's incessant bitching about this, I added a section of my PhD entitled, "But James, what about Limusaurus?" where I just deal with the problem that Limusaurus poses for all of my work. I was then told or asked in my closed-door defense, somebody, I think Alan, being like, "James, why did you call this section this?" It was, why did you make it a section at all, and why did you give it that name? And I had to explain to Alan that it was just because Alex was annoying me about it so much that I did it passive aggressively in a document he'll never read.
Hey, do you have any stories to tell about your defense? Or your PhD dissertation?
What
When you
stories-
gave it?
What do you mean when I gave it?
Did anyone ask you an annoying question?
Oh yeah, somebody sure did ask me an annoying question about Limusaurus. And he's in the room with me right now.
Yeah, I had to.
Yeah, no, of course he did. What was very fun is when I gave, Joey Stiegler was actually down here when I gave my my interview talk for the postdoc that I accepted. Mm-hmm. And I was really not expecting to have Joey in the audience when I was talking about all this stuff. And I got a lot of questions about it. Although it was a good engagement. I will say Limusaurus doesn't actually counter argue against anything specifically I say.
I mostly do it.
Oh yeah, no, I know.
As a bit.
But for those not in the know, what Limusaurus does is weird and might not have a lot of precedent, but doesn't counteract any of the mechanisms that I think do operate. It's something that I don't think we would expect to find, but it doesn't seem to run counter to any rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. It's a very cool fossil.
I mean, I can lament, certainly, which is that to my knowledge, our lamentations of the Monolophosaurus holotype is that the skull was like embedded in foam or some other substance for the purpose of, I believe, like mounting it.
I think
and
it's the whole
displaying
skeleton.
It may be the whole skeleton even, yeah, is like embedded in this like wall. Actually, yeah, you can kind of see a picture of it even on Wikipedia that it's like stuck in there. And it's made it very difficult for people to revisit the holotype and learn more about Monolophosaurus. And I don't think is the holotype the only specimen?
I believe so.
Let this be a lesson to anyone who's in charge of fossils. Don't embed them in foam. It's a bad idea.
That's one of the biggest scientific mishaps you could possibly do. I mean, at least for the old museums that did the plaster mounts of things in relief, at least they have the, I guess, justification of the fact that was when mounting techniques were quite primitive. And the kinds
Science
of steel
was real crude back
then. I mean, yes, we'll talk about Henry Fairfield Osborn eventually, but they didn't have the access to the kinds of equipment that could make steel armatures the way we do now, where now we have cradles that every bone can be mounted separately and on display but removed for research when necessary. You just couldn't do that at the time in the early 1900s. So a lot of the time for complete skeletons, they'd pour a lot of plaster around them to hold them in place and then make it a panel mount.
Yeah, right.
The Monolophosaurus was embedded in foam in the 90s or something, for reasons that nobody is clear on. Dalton, why don't we take this to the species viewers so we can rank it?
Certainly.
Yeah.
I hate basal tendinurans.
Hey, we're gonna figure it out. Don't worry.
All right, I like this color.
I like that a lot. That's great.
I need to gaze upon it. Yeah, that's that drip. That's swag. It's a swag.
I like it a lot. The
I
color,
also-
I mean. I'm torn on the character model because I find it ugly, but then I look at the real skeleton of Monolophosaurus, and I'm reminded that basal tetanurans were not good-looking dinosaurs.
Yeah.
They do look like gremlins and monsters.
Yeah.
All right, well, you know what?
Well, it's Amelia's
let's get
turn
that blunt.
first.
Let's get that blunt rotation going.
Sure. I like it. I liked a lot of its animations when it was running around. I really liked how it destroyed the Proceratosaurus. I think it tackled it. I don't know. It was great. It looks like, I think we've said this for another model. It looks like a decent Jurassic Parkified design. It's not horrible to look at, but it's not accurate. But as we said, this was not a good to look at animal. And I think they really make up for the ugly shape with the wonderful colors. All of the colors that we saw in the ones that have been released were I don't know. I liked all of them. They all highlight the crest. They have fun like eyeliner face paint things going on.
Yeah.
Different spots on the backs. No, I love it. I'll give it a B.
B is also my feeling. But the reasons why I'll explain right now. There's not really much to say. I kind of see where Amelia's coming from with the Jurassic Parkified comment, but to my eye, this doesn't look like, had this been in Jurassic Park the original, would it be designed like this? I don't think so. And I mean, that makes sense. It was designed for an animated show for children on Netflix. It was not like, this was not designed by Stan Winston Studios or anything. That said, it's not a terrible representation of the animal. It's just like, I just don't like the way it looks.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm getting at is it's a B tier design for me. Good color patterns, kind of just ugly. It's ugly because the animal was ugly, but it's still ugly.
Damn, brutal. I'm gonna echo the B, and I do like patterns. Beautiful. It's an ugly little gremlin. It's a nice animal to have in the game in terms of like phylogenetic position. But I guess honestly, what's keeping it squarely in B is that it is very small. It is not a good representation of how that this is like kind of probably a pretty important predator in the Middle Jurassic environment that it inhabits.
That's a good point.
That's all I got.
The size is a good point that I hadn't considered. You guys, man, I'm a little torn. So this, what this one's really doing is it's making me regret giving Herrerasaurus an S.
We gave that an A.
Oh, I know, but I gave it an S.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that was pretty cringy of you.
Because I like this more than the Herrerasaurus.
Oh my god, never mind.
Well, just to look at, because the coloration's prettier.
Okay.
And I don't know, it functions similar to me as the Herrerasaurus, which is as a silhouette. Like this reads Monolophosaurus. It does a good job of that. But yeah, we're going to not go down a path of regret, which would be me giving every design an S tier for some reason. And I'm going to put my critical brain on a little bit more.
Because you're a nice guy, Dalton.
Yeah, I think I would give this an A because of what we already have in B tier, which is like Triceratops, right?
Yeah.
And Marodactylus.
Marodactylus. Yeah, I like this more than those. This stands out more to me because of the coloration. But otherwise it fulfills kind of the same purpose as those other guys in B. I'm going to give it an A, but the Bs will have it.
Okay. If we're decided then, I will give Monolophosaurus, I'm ranking it right now, if I can find it, a B tier.
It is decided.
It is decided. Okay, everybody.
Are we ready?
Are we ready to spin the wheel?
Ready as I've ever been.
Okay.
Which is not very ready.
Then we will spin.
Spin
that.
Spin that wheel. Let's
Wheel.
go.
I'm actually excited. I can't wait to find out what it is.
That's a good sign. Oh
my god.
Okay.
Oh my god, we're blasting through all the early theropods.
Early theropod kick.
Okay. All right, guys.
Devices, all right.
So tune in next week for an even earlier theropod. This is our third basal thing in a row. We're doing great. I really hope next we get a Hadrosaurus sweep because I don't think we haven't had a Hadrosaur yet, right?
No, I don't
That's
think so.
kind of crazy. There's a bunch of them in the game.
It's crazy, man.
Yeah.
The wheels waited.
Yeah, the wheels weighted towards the early theropods.
Golubov said we should do an implied weight.
I think we should run our phylogenies by weighting the taxes, like the weighting according to something and how we rank the taxa in this game.
Yes.
Anyway, guys, tune in next week to see our thoughts on the game's model for Coelophysis.
A very important theropod.
A very, very important theropod. But before you go, remember that if you enjoyed this video, you should tell us that by liking the video. You should also subscribe to our channel if you want to see more videos like this in the future. We release one of these every week, and if you subscribe, you'll get notifications every time we release them. And we would really appreciate the show of support. We are growing a lot faster than we thought we would when we started this channel, and we really appreciate the support from our community. The comments you guys leave just really brighten our days a lot, especially when they're supportive or are in on some joke that we've got as we develop our inside jokes and lines. Remember that jokes come in threes, and that we will see you next time.
That's not a joke. That's a joke. I don't think that's a joke in our viewers. That's just something we like to say.